Good morning. This is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to our next episodes of Work Matters with Pastor Will. This will represent 3 new episodes in Work Matters. This will be 9, 10, and 11. And we want to lift up here Jeremy Paul Myers. He's a professor at Augsburg University in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he's the professor of Youth Family Ministries, where he lifts up discipleship with young people. And that's why we're so fascinated with his these 3 talks, because he lifts up a theme that we're all committed to, and that is the discipleship of youth, whether those are our children or our grandchildren or, well, kids around us that we really care about. And so the next 3 episodes, Pastor will lead us into this important discussion. The first will be on the good news and bad news surrounding youth. And they're surrounded by so much bad news, we want to understand that so we know how to preach Jesus to them, the good news of God. The second session will be on adolescents as undeveloped consumers versus called co-creators. And so there's a theological good news that the professor wants to bring to youth. And the third session will be entitled Adolescence, Understanding the History of Adolescence, How is it developed, and understanding how we can share with them the call of Jesus to be and to do now, not in preparing for the future necessarily, but how they can follow Jesus in this moment. This is a great conversation. Professor Jeremy Myers does a wonderful job. You're going to enjoy this. And so now we ask Pastor Will to lead us in this important discussion.
Thank you, Pastor Rick. Welcome, everyone. I'm Pastor Will. Welcome to Work Matters. And as Pastor Rick alluded to, we are beginning a 3-part series all about adolescence, those teenage years. And we have Dr. Jeremy Myers from Augustana University with us for the next 3 episodes. I'm so excited to cover this topic. And so today we're talking all about the news of adolescence, the good news of adolescence and the bad news of adolescence. And those who are adults who have been through their teenage years, I'm sure can recall all the bad news, all the bad experiences of our teenage years, whether it be the pressure we faced from our friends or our family, from our schoolwork, you name it. But today in this short episode from Dr. Myers, we're going to talk a little bit about the good news and how the church can be involved in that good news in the lives of our adolescents. So I won't talk any further. I'll let you watch the episode, and I will see you on the other side. Enjoy.
There's a lot of anxiety around young people and why they aren't at church, or whether or not they even want to be at church. And I get that anxiety. I understand why it exists. But I think any problem we want to solve, we can come at that problem from a place of anxiety. We can try and solve it because we're anxious about it, or we can try and solve it because we're compassionate about it. And our approach towards something, when we approach something out of compassion, our approach to it will be completely different than when we approach it out of anxiety. And so some of what I hope to do today is maybe lessen your anxiety about this and increase your compassion about it. I'm not trying to say you don't love your young people. I believe that you do. And so what I'm trying to say is trust that love, and don't be too anxious, because there's what I see in our young people is a lot of hope, where the involvement in congregations across the country has dipped, but our young people have not given up on God. They're still quite curious about it. They ask a lot of questions. They wonder quite a bit about it, and they need communities of people who will come around them in new ways, in different ways. The purpose of this talk is to not tell you what those ways are, because they're different in every place. But the purpose of this talk is to sort of liberate us from the way we've been thinking about teenagers and start imagining a new way of thinking about teenagers. So that's what we hope to do. So let's have a little fun at their expense. I like to start this way sometimes just by throwing out stereotypes. So teenagers are so, and these could be teenagers today, or these could have been things people said about you when you were a teenager. So let's just throw some of those out. Teenagers are so, what? Sullen. Moody.
Self-centered.
Self-centered. Spoiled.
Responsible.
Irresponsible. My mother-in-law is going off.
Non-communicative.
Non-communicative. Yeah. Teenagers are so lazy, inexperienced,
Tied to their phone.
tied to their phones, insecure,
Uneducated.
uneducated, cliquish,
Unwise.
unwise,
Ditzy.
mean, kids,
Ditzy.
ditzy.
Don't care if they drive or not.
They don't care if they, yeah, right. They don't, they're not a big deal anymore.
They are so wonderful.
Oh! You blew the, see how you imagine the schools
Oh,
of
I thought you were
shopping.
looking for that negative.
They are wonderful. And this is why I like to do this exercise. Because if you take any one of those things we just said and ran it through this gauntlet, we start to realize that everything we just said is not true, right? So we'll use an example. Someone said lazy. Is laziness reserved for the teenage years? No. Then why do we call them lazy? Are adults ever lazy?
Yeah.
Then why do we talk about teenagers as being lazy? Have you experienced a young person not being lazy? Right. You get the picture, right? Anything and every single stereotype we could possibly pull out of our heads about young people is just not true. It's not factual all the time. Do they behave in these ways sometimes? Yes, absolutely. Do we? Yes, absolutely.
But historically, if you look at some of this, this is what was said in the 1600s, the 1700s, and the 1800s
Right.
about young people.
Right.
And it's hilarious to read the historical accounts of this.
Yes, absolutely. And we can either continue to allow those stereotypes to shape our imagination around our young people, or we can find new ways to think about them because they'll live up to our expectations no matter how low they are, right? So shifting from there, I want to start with the gospel, the good news, and a particular way of thinking about it, because we use this phrase all the time. We talk all the time about sharing the good news, right? We share the good news, we share the gospel, but what does the gospel actually do? What does good news actually do? And I love this definition by Canadian theologian Douglas John Hall. He says, gospel's good news because it engages, takes on, and does battle with bad news, offering another alternative, another vision of what could be, another way into the future. Some people get nervous when they see this definition because they say, well, where is Jesus in that? And I would say the good news is always Jesus, and Jesus shows up, looks, and sounds differently based on how my neighbor's experiencing bad news in that moment. The way I show up with the good news of Jesus is going to look and sound different depending on how my neighbor is experiencing suffering, fear, brokenness, anxiety, bad news in their life. Okay? So if we want to proclaim good news to our young people or to anyone, we have to first do the hard work of understanding the bad news, right? And so then the big question that I've been mulling over, and this book essentially, there's an endorsement on the back that says Jeremy Paul Myers has offered us a timely and engaging little book. There's a friend of mine who endorsed the book, and he called it a little book. And so I told him, if next time you write a book, let me endorse it, and I'll say, Andy Root has written the same book for a 7th time. But this little book is like 2 decades of me trying to think differently about young people. And the question I was sort of pondering, I've been pondering and wondering is, what if the primary way our young people are experiencing bondage, brokenness, fear, suffering, or bad news in their life? What if the primary source of bad news in their life is this caricature we've projected on them called the adolescent, the teenager. These assumptions that we make about them, right? All teenagers are always this way, therefore you must be just another one of those, right? And we think that when we see them walking down the street, in the middle of the street, we think about that when they're loud at the restaurant, right? All of those things go through our head. Oh, teenagers today, right? And so what if the primary way our young people are in bondage is through this thing we project on them that we call the adolescent, right? So adolescence as a life stage is relatively new. It's not even really 100 years old yet. And I want to unpack some of that history today with you.
Welcome back, everyone. What did you think of that episode on the good and the bad news of our adolescents? You know, the church plays a role in the lives of our teenage youth, whether they attend regularly here or not. They are still a part of the body of Christ. And you know, they face a lot of anxiety in their lives through this bad news, through this framework that we as a part of the world have placed on them. But you know, as Dr. Myers alluded to, there is a solution, and that solution is the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, which brings compassion instead of anxiety into the lives of our teenage youth. You know, our gospel engages, as Dr. Myers said, it takes on, it battles those evil forces and those systems of framework that do not allow our youth to flourish, that don't allow them to live out their created purpose, their God-given vocations in life. And so we have a big role as the church to play. We need to continue to be in the lives of our adolescents, of our teenagers. We need to keep sharing that good news with them. The good news of grace and forgiveness, and as Dr. Myers said, compassion, to let them know that we're walking with them. We're walking as the hands and feet of God through Jesus Christ with them in this journey that is life. And so it's a big responsibility for us to have. But the future of our faith is at stake because of all that is going on in our world. And so you and I play a larger role in all of this and in the lives of our adolescents. And that is the key takeaway that we need to bring with us in our daily lives as we engage in our youth in our community. I hope you have enjoyed watching this episode. Please, please, please like, follow, share these videos with one another, subscribe to our page on our YouTube. We actually have two YouTube pages. The first one is under Emmanuel Academies, and then the other one is Naples Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time on another episode of Work Matters with Pastor Will. Blessings to you all.